warm welcome to everybody joining us today. We are here today to introduce to you the BRaVE Award winners and their projects. So next to me I have Richard McNeil Wilson and the PhD researcher Ines Bolanos Zomano. Thank you for being here with us. So first we're going to have an introduction from Richard. Afterwards there's going to be a series of inputs from BRaVE consortium partners on different factors of radicalization and violent extremism. We're also going to have an input from Vivian Gerrand on the importance of projects like the ones that have been awarded by the BRaVE Award. And at the end, we will talk to our winning projects here on stage. So, Richard is also one of the main coordinators of the European University Institute and will introduce the project to us.
Thanks so much. My name is Richard and I'm the research coordinator of the BRaVE project based at the European University. We work with several different consortium partners, including Cultures Interactive, who have kindly put on this event today in Berlin. Working with partners all around Europe, we're exploring various different discussions around violent extremism, polarization and resilience, as part of a 3-year European Commission-funded project under the Horizon 2020 programme. The BRaVE project, or the Building Resilience Against Violent Extremism and Polarisation project, looks at violent extremism and polarisation in 3 different ways. Firstly, we aim to understand some of the processes that are taking place in Europe around polarisation and violent extremism. How is violent extremism occurring in Europe? How is it linked to polarization? How can we understand these processes that are happening with concerns over violent Islamism and violent jihadism, concerns around the rise of the far right in Europe? And how can we understand these processes that are taking place? Secondly, as part of the project, we're looking at whether resilience can offer a response to violent extremism and polarization in Europe. As part of that, we're engaging with different youth projects, some of which we're very lucky to have with us today. We're looking at some of the responses that use resilience, particularly on a community level, in order to respond against violent extremism and polarization. And thirdly, as part of the BRaVE project, we're looking to support these projects. We're looking to support policy from the European Commission all the way down to individual projects that take place in local communities that are run by grassroots groups and grassroots movements. So as part of that, we've been working across the 3 years. This BRaVE Fair marks the start of the end of the BRaVE project, and we're very keen to be sharing some of the work that we've been doing, some of the findings that we have, some of the projects that we've supporting, and some of the work that we've been doing as part of the BRaVE project over these years.
Great. So it sounds super interesting. To start off, I would really like to know how you define extremism, since it's all-consuming topic.
This is a good question.
So just to be clear, I think the BRaVE main focus is violent extremism, and I would like to explain a bit what the difference is. So violent extremism, we usually refer to the process where a person engages in a mindset or a set of beliefs that justify the use of violence to achieve political goals. So in theory, you have a clear divide between violent extremism, so justifying violence, and let's say plain extremism, which is merely the adoption of those beliefs. That distinction is often not as clear as we would like it to be, because it's very difficult to draw a line on what is justification of violence and what is an extremist belief, and sometimes in a group you can have all of those in a continuum, and it's not just either or. Other things that make this a challenging field to work in, very engaging, very interesting, but definitely needing research and projects like this, is the fact that, for example, youth, which is often talked about in terms of violent extremism and prevention projects. I mean, we've all been teenagers. We all know that it's quite common for the youth to engage in anti-social or anti-system beliefs or actions. So that just adds another layer of complexity to us being able to pinpoint what it is and what it is not violent extremism.
do you think that there's ever a justification of violence? Because when we're talking about this, we're talking out of a more or not privileged Western European kind of state, like situation. So do you think that there is, that is maybe questionable, that violence is always like never justified?
I'm gonna take this one, and it's a really difficult question, and it's a really difficult question that also ties into discussions over polarization. So, of course, as we know, in recent years in Europe, in North America, for instance, there's been lots of concern around the rise of political polarization, of societal polarization. What does it mean that we have these kind of different groups that are often competing, often kind of pushing for violence in different contexts? The link, of course, between polarization and violent extremism, and even kind of what violent extremism is very contentious. It's a very difficult discussion. We know, of course, we do have concerns around the rise of the far right. We do have concerns over groups that would use violence and violent and terroristic acts in Europe. At the same time, it's very important to recognize that polarization may also be part of a perfectly healthy, functioning democratic society, especially ones where there's lots of kind of concern around inequalities, political inequalities, socioeconomic inequalities. So really the project tries not to take too much of a kind of prescriptive line on this and just explore some of the discussions that are being had on a policy level, on a local level, on a critical level as well, like how we understand the role of polarization, what we understand violent extremism to be, and just to kind of explore that a bit more.
If I may, I think also what you never want to do is that you never want to silence dissident opinions. So this is just another layer of complexity, because you want to make sure, as Richard said, polarization is a function of society. It happens when people live together. They're going to have different opinions, different ideas. And you want to be very careful not to demonize any one discourse that is not directly linked to, harm or violence by association, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. And so what were your favorites? Like, what were the moments where you were like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm working here. This is why I did all these over hours and barely had any sleep.
Can we say this?
Yeah, I mean, apart from this fantastic event, where it's great to kind of see kind of the youth project. I mean, the work that's been done as part of the BRaVE Fair has been incredible, because we've been able to see some of the projects and support them directly, that have been working with youth, from youth, around issues of violent extremism, and looking at how there are different grassroots responses to it, and responses to concern over the rise of the far right, over Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, all the kind of different youth projects and approaches that have been taken. It's also been really enjoyable to kind of, dig up some of these questions and look at them from other angles. Like, I think we have to take an approach to violent extremism which also looks at the role that the state plays in potentially radicalizing or pushing groups towards violence, the problematic kind of policies that different countries have put in place, and how they may impact on issues of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, on structural racism. So for me, some of the work that we've done on the BRaVE website is definitely worth checking out. We've been mapping different CVE, countering violent extremism projects that are taking place all throughout Europe. We've been putting together toolkits to think about how we would measure polarization in different countries, how would we think about measuring resilience in different countries to polarization and to violence, to sort of critically analyze some of those questions.
I mean, I think my favorite thing, everyone's favorite thing, is these projects, right? Like these young people, these people who are not maybe directly working on prevention, but they were working on social issues, community life, etc., jumping in with a completely fresh mindset and actually being people who are creating projects for, they know their target audience. It's not an abstract project, it's a very localized.
Working together.
Exactly, working together. People from the community who have worked with this target audience being like, how do we design a project for them? So I think it's absolutely what we want and what we need in all prevention. And a thing I personally really like about the project is that it's going to leave many things behind. It's going to have a lasting impact. So Richard mentioned in their website, in the BRaVE website, there's so many resources. There's also a lot of free courses, like massive open online courses that anyone can take for free, and that introduce these topics, issues of polarization, city development, like really anything that could, be touched by these projects. And so anyone who wants to just learn a bit can put a couple of hours into it and come out not with like a definition, but the tools to adopt their own definition.
Just be further educated.
Exactly.
And also, if it's for free, the better. So it's not part of the classes structure, but like everybody can be part of this. Yeah, really great. What were the hardships? Where do you we talk about the good, we also have to talk about the bad. Where do you have the feeling it seems just a bit circling?
We've got lots of papers coming out for academics. We've got lots of papers coming out.
To grind them up.
Yeah, I mean, it's always exciting working with a consortium of academics, making sure they submit their work on time, making sure I submit my work on time, mainly. But we know we've got some really interesting research that's come out around how we think about resilience in different concepts, in different contexts. So we have a special issue coming out run by Dublin City University and Voxpol, who have been our partners on the project, looking at how resilience could be understood in an online context. And as part of that, we've been working together, putting together ideas, doing research. We have a special issue coming out very soon with First Monday. We've also been working with Central European University in looking at how resilience works outside of a Western European context, particularly in a kind of an Eastern European context. Does the idea of resilience hold? Does it work outside of these contexts? How can we think about it? How can we think about the different factors, socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, political factors? So yeah, it's been long hours put in by everyone in the consortium at various stages.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, the main challenge is the theme, right? Like, as we
so complex.
Exactly, it is so complex, and there's often not one unique, valid definition, and so it's not only academics that we love to argue, like how many angels can dance on top of a pinhead, but like legitimately, these are very complex issues, and there's often a problematic of adopting top-down definitions. So even though the project has done a lot to counteract that by bringing people from the bottom up and giving them money and tools to do their things, we cannot forget that this is still somewhat of a top-down approach. Like, this is what violent extremism is. This is how we understand the situation. This is how we think we should fix it.
Yeah.
And that can be problematic.
Yeah. Also we're operating in these big kind of securitized discussions around counterterrorism, around the ongoing sort of long effects of the war on terror, which are still playing out throughout the world. And I think we really have to be careful to accept that there are certain problems, especially when it comes to recently the rise of the far right and the impact that it's having in Europe and elsewhere throughout the world, but also not to kind of play into that war on terror narrative, which has dominated for quite a long time, and has brought quite a lot of kind of Islamophobic ideas, quite a lot of structural racism in, a huge kind of advancement of the securitization of the state and yeah, exactly. So it's very difficult, and I don't know if we've managed it, but it's very difficult to kind of, how do we think about these issues in a as desecuritized way as possible, and try to reconceptualize them. Is it possible? Are we just kind of playing back into the narrative again? But who knows? But these are discussions that have to be had at least, and just pulled apart. And
But it seems that it's always the best approach to, instead of having already like a certain agenda going there, being like, that is what we think is best, talking to the people, gathering like the problems there, telling you, and then working together with them. I have the feeling that's a great approach to be not part of this top-down.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's possible because it's a 3-year project. So you have quite a like initial phase where you can actually figure out how you're going to approach it, like gather resources, gather ideas. I mean, I think BRaVE has been one of the best projects that I've seen on this area, both in terms of the people working in it, the outputs, like the things that have been done, and also the way that it has engaged with other people working in the field from a different angle, to sort of like, again, not have our own monolithic idea imposed on it.
And I was just going to add, and I think we've like started some good conversations as well. So part of this event, I think, is like thinking about what research should be going forward in this field, what other projects can pick up on, discussions around polarization, around violent extremism and their legitimacy as terms, the legitimacy in drawing a link between them, what resilience is, and how we can kind of discuss that further in a European context and beyond.
And translating for everybody.
So yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Scientific world.
Yeah.
Everybody, people,
We're not just having ivory tower conversations. And
I mean, I hope we're being clear now.
I didn't understand a word.
No, but I think this is definitely also a problem because you have now such a vast amount of literature and like academic research on these areas, and it's not often transparent or accessible to the people that we want it to be transparent and accessible for, because ultimately it's not academics that implement prevention projects, or not only, it's a lot of social workers, judges, law enforcement, educators, etc. So you really want to be able to communicate to them what we have found out, what this project has found out, rather.
Yeah. Okay, so how long are you in the project?
So I started at the beginning in February 2019. The project had just been implemented, starting the implementation stage, put together and led by our brilliant PI project investigator Professor Anna Triandafilidou, who is now at Ryerson University in Canada. I mean, everything was in place. We had like the coalition in place, so really my job was just kind of taking that up and making sure that the outputs were done, making sure the project developed in the way that we wanted it to, and found new ways to develop.
And funny enough, I am not meant to be here in the strictest, purest sense of the word. I'm an interloper. No, I started my PhD at the European University Institute, which is where research part of the project is hosted, at the same time that the project started. And it is exactly my field of research. So prevention projects funded by the EU, how do they work? So I've just sort of like been in and out, doing odd jobs for them, working with them, writing with researchers, sort of adding my grain of salt.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being with us. I heard you have something for us today. Do you have a small introduction for me?
Yes.
Yes?
Do I?
Yes. No?
Yes, for the next. Yes, of course I do. Absolutely, it's all going very smoothly.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. So we'll be moving on to some discussions, a little bit more kind of discussions on some of the findings that we have, some of the discussions we've been having on the causes behind violent extremism, or at least how they've kind of been understood within policy making and within research. Unfortunately, Francesca Scrinzi, who was supposed to be presenting here, can't make it today. So I'm very excited to kind of take over that discussion, and I'll be kind of leading with, first of all, a discussion on the sort of the cultural factors behind violent extremism. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're excited.
Yeah, good. Super. Right. It's so nice to be here and discuss some of the research that we've been doing and some of the findings that we have. As part of the project, we've been doing some research and investigating different factors behind violent extremism, how they're understood, their legitimacy, how they're imposed into policy or into practice. And so as part of this, I'm going to present some discussion on the cultural factors of violent extremism and how they're understood. We also have subsequent presentations on the socioeconomic factors behind violent extremism, as well as on network and communication-related factors. So I'm just going to, for 10 minutes, kind of talk through some of the discussions that we've been having as part of the BRaVE factors, part of the BRaVE project, looking at cultural factors. And I think cultural factors are some of the most interesting ones kind of to start off with when we're talking about discussions around violent extremism and polarization, because they are some of the most reoccurring factors that we see in policy and research. So a lot of the discussion within policy has focused on what are understood to be ideological or ideational factors behind violent extremism. There are various problems with this, and there are various kind of interesting discussions that we can pull out, which I will as part of this discussion. Cultural factors focus specifically on identity formation and the perception of self and others. So how are individuals who engage in violence understanding themselves? How are they understanding the communities around them? How are they engaging with different communities, with the state, with individuals from their own and from different backgrounds? These factors have included, for instance, within policy and discussion, how religious or political ideas are conceptualized, psychological factors, gender, and how individuals relate to different groups. In essence, the mindset for violence, such as ideologies or hatred towards different communities. Now, these are a vast array of different factors and discussions to get into. And as I said, they've kind of formed the central focus of a lot of the discussion around violent extremism and how to respond to them. As part of the work that we've been doing at BRaVE, we've put together a series of polarization indicators. These 20 indicators sort of boil down all the discussions that are being had in policy, in practice, in research, around the causes of polarization and the causes of violent extremism. And these 20 factors, of these 20 factors, 5 of which roughly fall within this kind of purview of cultural factors. These are lack of transnational identity, a lack of cultural mixing, ignorance of minority cultures, restriction on minority symbols, and individual perceptions of self and of others. So if we move on to the next slide, and we can look at this lack of a transnational identity. Now, this particular factor is a very European-centric discussion that's been had that looks at articulations of identity that fail to transcend narrow national or regional conceptualizations that are more conducive to polarization. Particularly, we see this around discussions of the far right, the growth of the far right, concerns around the rise of militant forms of nationalism, and how these forms of nationalism are articulated in society. Such identities are exclusionary by design, hostile to alternative cultural or faith groups and communities, and framed as in direct competition with and threatened by the continued coexistence of other identities. And this factor is interesting because it operates on quite a macro level. It operates on an international level as well as on an individual level. So it's how individuals see others from different nationalities, from different communities, across boundaries, and how they conceptualize themselves within those boundaries. And as part of the BRaVE project, we've kind of come up with a resilience approach to support practitioners in adopting a sort of a complex and a flexible cultural identity. So how do we encourage those complex and flexible cultural identities to develop in people? How do we encourage what we understand to be bridging between different communities, between different nationalities, and to support that kind of cultural bridging across different individuals? Moving on to the next slide. Another issue that we found within practice is the lack of cultural mixing. So a lack of cultural mixing is cited as allowing for stereotypes and negative judgments to occur, with studies suggesting that lesser exposure to different communities can lead to higher instances of prejudices or fear. And as part of that, a lot of the responses have been around kind of what is the role of interfaith, what is the role of intercultural projects in helping to support those engagements between different communities and support that kind of cultural mixing, a greater emphasis on interculturality as part of an identity. Moving on to the next slide. Of course, a lack of cultural mixing can bring around an ignorance of minority cultures, and particularly we want to kind of focus on this concern of how majority cultures interact with minority cultures, and the way in which that can be articulated in racism, in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, in dangerous sort of stereotypes and tropes towards minority groups particularly. It also allows, as well as sort of allowing for pervasive stereotypes to take root, it also provides the foundation for misinformation and disinformation to be believed. And that's obviously a particular problem with the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic and the often kind of racialized narratives that we often see within kind of quite extreme and extremist narratives towards minority groups and against minority groups, and the way that those are used in spreading fear and concern around COVID-19. Moving on to the next slide. Restrictions on minority symbols is another point that we highlighted as causing concern. And I think this is a really interesting discussion as well that we see particularly in the European context. In a European context which is marked by articulations of racism and Islamophobia that are often tied to a security narrative and often tied to discussions around the war on terror. It's very interesting that the research came back that restrictions on minority symbols can help to support, to enable the development of extreme narratives and extremist groups. So restrictions on minority symbols may help to enable ignorance of minority cultures and may cast minority beliefs as counter to national values. We can see this in some of the very hard articulations of French republicanism and laïcité. We can see this in some of the discussions over the headscarf in countries such as Denmark and attitudes towards minorities and linking them to security concerns in Denmark, concerns about migration. And it can really help to fuel racism and resentment and often push towards polarization and violent extremism. Moving on to the next slide. And finally, individual perceptions of self and others. So, of course, within the discussions around radicalization, concerns around radicalization, we've seen a lot of studies around the role that victimhood, the role that humiliation can be found to play as powerful narratives in polarization. And these feelings is quite an interesting term because a lot of it is about perception and how individuals perceive other groups, perceive them as potential threats to their own. And it really focuses around the creation of an in-group through casting of a hostile out-group, as seen, for instance, in far-right attitudes towards minorities, incel communities towards women, and some of the discussions that have been had around there recently. Moving on to the next slide. So what kind of projects tackle cultural factors? We're here to work with projects, to support projects that are engaging with this on the ground, and not to just have an academic conversation. We can see some of the interfaith and intercultural work that's happening is helping to tackle these prejudices, helping to tackle stereotypes and tropes, projects challenging prejudice, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and negative attitudes towards minority communities. Work providing a platform for communities with less access to political or social platforms is incredibly important in terms of looking at the inequality in how often minority groups have in terms of access towards media, access towards mainstream political discussions, helping to raise individuals from different communities and issues that they're facing up onto a national and a European platform. It can include theological and cultural exchange, for instance, or simply providing a safe space for discussion and the building of friendships. Moving on to the next slide. One practice that we've been working with and kindly developed by one of our partners, SEGI, which works in Brussels looking at anti-Semitism, is to think about the kind of biases that we have and that individuals have coming to a group in creating a safe space for interfaith and intercultural exchange as part of shaping open identity. So we've had interesting discussions around biases, how they can be explicit and implicit, conscious or unconscious, how all individuals have biases and how they are ingrained within individuals, how we as project makers, as practitioners, as people engaging in this field also have our own biases and how to kind of think through them. The role of systemic inequalities and institutional discrimination in these biases. The history of these biases, as well as how our own biases can be understood and responded to in order to create a safe space. Moving on to the next slide. Finally, we really ought to touch on the limitations of cultural factors, as will be raised by all the discussants today. The factors that we're looking at are not conducive to violent extremism, to polarization, to instances of violence in and of themselves. And I think we need to be particularly careful with cultural factors. Because they've been so embedded in policy, this idea of an individual thinking a certain way or believing a certain view that is extreme or is extremist or is designated extremist by some but not others, we have to be careful not to assume that these will lead to violence. We have to be careful not to essentialize our understanding of violent extremism and imply that certain communities are more prone to violence or that certain beliefs necessarily transform into certain violent actions. We know that not sufficiently necessary. It's not sufficiently necessary for violence in and of themselves just to hold these views. And because they tend to dominate policy, we can sometimes lose a lot of the structural factors which go behind and help to enable violent extremism. So by focusing too much on the cultural factors, on beliefs, on ideologies, we can often miss big kind of structural issues, socioeconomic inequalities. We can miss structural racism and the impact that has. We can miss network-related factors, so how different groups, far-right groups are developing, how they're engaging with different people, by just focusing too much on cultural factors. And in fact, just by focusing on cultural factors, we need to be aware that they may not solve, but they could in fact exacerbate existing inequalities. So hopefully this should give a broad overview of some of the discussions we've had around cultural factors and their role in, or potential role in, violent extremism and polarization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just two questions before we move on to Michael Zeller, who's with us here right now, telling us something about the socioeconomic factors of radicalization. Before we go on to that, just two. So, when I heard it right, you said especially multiculturalism is always something that can be helpful, that can be used, that brings people together and like lessens extremism, right? So especially in Science Today, I read a few papers, it seems that it is especially a problem of where people live. Like within cities, like certain cultures just living in a certain area, only having to do with their own, or like the more money they have living. So how do you get around that? Like how can you make a society, how can you get people together that never see themselves in everyday life?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and there's two actual points as well that kind of need to be brought out of that question. Firstly, I mean, there are various studies which look at, for instance, when it comes to migration and migrants within different communities. Often, it will show that communities where there are the fewest migrants, there's the lowest amount of immigration and emigration, will often have the most hostile views towards migrants. And I think that's a very important thing to place at the heart of discussion around cultural factors. Because it does seem that engagement with interfaith and intercultural works particularly is very powerful in helping to dispel stereotypes. And a lot of the kind of we see evidence from manifestos, from terrorism and violent attacks. A lot of it is built on quite violent and long-standing tropes, which go back to historical anti-Semitism, draw on historical Orientalism and Islamophobia. So I think that's very important in kind of tackling some of this. We also need to be careful not to take the point of view that it's implying that minority communities need to integrate more, for instance. And I know this is an approach, for instance, where there's been a lot of critical discussion into some of the policies that's been adopted by Denmark, for instance, on highlighting minority communities as being problematic. And we see this throughout kind of various countries and policies in Europe. Actually, this approach is much more about how do we build from a community level to support engagement. Now, a lot of that will be supporting youth projects, such as the ones that we've got today, who kind of go out into communities and help to bring in different people from different backgrounds to engage in community projects. The role of the internet is always kind of cited in quite a negative sense when we discuss violent extremism and polarization, but actually I think the opening up of online spaces has been very instrumental. Unfortunately, of course, in creating content that can push people towards extremist views or push certain narratives, but also in kind of opening up opportunities for projects and discussions and engagement with different communities from individuals who may not come from very diverse or broad communities. So it's about kind of helping to support on a community level, whether that's local networks, whether that's online networks, whether that's policy support, helping to kind of grease the wheels of that engagement between different communities and between different faiths, and ultimately trying to dispel some of the stereotypes which exist in the media from certain politicians that are sometimes pervasive in society.
Yeah, that's a really big, big, complex problem you're trying to solve with your project. It's really, Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're getting to the socio-economic factors. Would you, from Michael Zeller, from the Central European University?
Sure. Shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you also have a presentation for us.
Yes.
We get into it.
Yeah.
But Richard, you're staying here?
I'm staying here.
Thank you so much.
This is much more fun than Zoom.
Yeah, nice.
So I'm going to talk briefly about socioeconomic factors related to violent extremism and polarization, and some of the policies that can support resilience against those factors, and more broadly about what the CU team has been doing as part of the BRaVE project. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I just want to provide an overview of what CU has been doing and putting out as part of the project. Last year we held a couple of workshops about socioeconomic factors and their role in violent extremism and polarization, as well as policy and practitioner remedies of those. And I believe the discussion paper for those workshops is available on the BRaVE website. We also have two forthcoming outputs that we're pretty excited about. One is a special issue with several contributions from people within and outside the project, as well as a policy paper based on some of the mapping work that Richard mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So when we think about socioeconomic conditions and their role in violent extremism, I think we have to differentiate between the certain levels that were focusing on, that we're analyzing, and then the context in which it's situated. And so at the level of analysis, there's a partition between individuals and social levels. And as Richard mentioned, with cultural factors, socioeconomic conditions are neither necessary nor solely sufficient. You know, if you look at various indicators of socioeconomic welfare, whether it's education or real terms income, they're not sufficient to explain consistently instances of individual radicalization. But what they can do is play an influential role in processes of radicalization as individuals become more habituated to the idea of engaging in violent activity. And we've unfortunately seen some recent examples of that with fighters, foreign fighters going to Syria, as well as some of the individual right-wing terrorist incidents over the last decade where people felt depressed about their economic prospects or about feelings of relative deprivation to other groups. Next slide, please. At the social level, again, they can be part of a process of dividing and polarizing society. They can be grievance forming at a group level where individuals and communities come to resent other communities for their privileges or for their economic status. And most obviously, this can be directed at class levels, but you also see it in populist rhetoric that's actively engaging in trying to demonize a nebulously defined elite. And when this sorts of social level fosters polarization, that in turn has a rebound effect to the individual level. Next slide, please. Yes. Well, putting these two levels of analyses in context, I think it's important to consider the overall political nature in which they're situated. And I think you can divide that, at least within the European space, between contexts that are liberal, democratic, and contexts that are unfortunately increasingly illiberal. CEU, situated formerly in Hungary, unfortunately has some experience with this. But the upshot of this is that when we think about polarization, when we think about radicalization, and especially when we think about resilience to them, the political parties that shape conversations and how these concepts are used also shape whether they're applied in good faith or as means of suppressing political opponents. And actually, in the forthcoming special issue of the journal Intersections, Richard has an interesting paper about that in the Crimean context, where countering violent extremism has taken on a distinctly anti-Islamic agenda. Next slide, please. In liberal contexts in Western Europe, where the space hasn't itself been radicalized by illiberal actors, at least not to the same extent, we witness a lot of problems of individual radicalization, and this was most prominently brought to light with the war in Syria and the individuals who went to fight there. But we also see generally greater levels of socioeconomic polarization, which kind of parallels growing inequality. And you can actually look at the BRaVE polarization indicators and the socioeconomic measures to check that. Next slide, please. In a liberal context, there's greater operation at that social level, where you have political actors that are actively trying to foster their own constituency at the expense of vulnerable minority groups. This leads to group-based radicalization, and it's something that's unfortunately very visible in Eastern Europe and wider afield there. While in these contexts, while in these illiberal areas, socioeconomic factors are present, more recently they've taken a secondary role to social issues, most notably around sex, gender, and orientation. Next slide, please. When it comes to addressing it at the individual level, Richard's actually touched on this quite well about how you work with policies from state institutions as well as practitioners to foster these various factors of individual resilience. And some of these elements that Richard mentioned already are cultural connectedness and bridging between communities. And socioeconomically, the way to think of those is that they cost money. And so when you see government policy that is at times increasingly restrictive towards welfare initiatives or towards funding these sorts of programs to foster dialogue, then you're weakening the structures that can promote resilience. Next slide, please. And then at the social level, looking at sort of the aggregate of those individual resiliences and how they manifest at a community level, you can measure that in some of the ways that the BRaVE project has done. One of the things that I'm excited about for our special issue is that it looks at the way that's done in illiberal regimes where the state is sometimes actively opposed or corroding those resilient structures. And they're nevertheless, by social movements, by community and non-governmental organizations, are methods that aim at accumulating feelings of resilience and ability to deal with these polarized and extremist spaces. There are those that simply adapt to it and apply these qualities of social resilience. And then, unfortunately, as I mentioned, there are political actors that are actively undermining these qualities. So there's a great deal to consider, and socioeconomic factors similar to cultural issues sometimes sit in the background. So it presents challenges to understand their role in them, especially where illiberal actors maybe foreground cultural issues or social grievances. But they're there and they play a role at both individual and social levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, I have a question.
Okay.
We were talking about the socioeconomic factors within also, like, for example, the democracy. And you were saying that especially populists like to go towards the state, criticizes, and then it can become to more extremist, like, ideals and norms, right?
Yes, I think their rhetoric can foster extremism. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have the feeling it can also go the other way around. For example, living in a welfare state, that we finance certain people with welfare, and then it becomes like an extremism, like this way around. Like, we have to pay from our taxes for these people, and it also can become a factor for extremism as well?
Yes, I think you're right. I think when people get an image or a perception, which I think quite often doesn't match up with reality, they form these grievances at individual and community levels, and that is something that populists or other opportunist political actors can play off of, and it becomes this reinforcing cycle of rhetoric and grievance.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen it especially in pandemic times, how easy it is to enforce ideas or use idealization for extremism. So next we are, yeah. So, thank you so much for both of your inputs. We're going to spin off a bit, and next we have Maura via Zoom about.
I think they're having technical difficulties.
Yes, okay, give me 1 second. Right. So the person I was just about to introduce is not going to be introduced because of technical difficulties. So I would say we're going to have a few more questions here, and then we're going to have a really short break. Yeah? Okay, to go back to the socio-economic factors and also like political actors, like you said, going against resilient projects. Can you go a bit deeper in this, please?
I'm sorry.
You said political actors sometimes also abuse.
Well, in Eastern Europe, where this special issue that's coming out next month is focused, a couple of the studies look at the way Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus has, during this wave of protests that began around the election time last year, has used a parochial and patriarchal rhetoric to cast protesters as illegitimate, as undermining Belarus, often supposedly under the pay of foreign agents. And that's undermining their legitimate right to contest supposedly democratic elections. In Poland as well, you see the way the governing Peace, Law and Justice Party has very actively demonized LGBT groups and condemned supposedly LGBT ideology, something that they claim is as extreme as communism. And to cast significant minority groups within society as an internal threat, it in itself fosters polarization, and it makes individuals distrust their communities or the communities that they live near and interact with, and see them as less legitimate in the public space.
I think also, just sorry to jump in, I think it also raises some really difficult questions around resilience and the idea of resilience and applying that. Because within this idea of resilience and even within counter-extremism, we tend to kind of take this assumption that the state is a benign actor in this. Now, when you move into discussions around illiberal regimes, you can see quite clearly the state is not a benign actor. It's often an openly malign actor towards certain groups, towards political opposition. And even when you look at kind of Western states as well, depending on who you talk to, will greatly kind of change their view on whether they see the state as a benign actor, whether they see the state as a good actor and the government as a good actor. So I think really one of the problems around resilience and this concept of resilience is whether you can assume that the state is always there to do good and always there to counter extremism. And of course, within an illiberal context, it's much easier to see that that's not necessarily the case, and hopefully that should also reflect a lens on some of the interest within Western states as well that may not be benign.
Yeah, I mean, already in the fact of financial security in our healthcare system, in the effects of language, like for example that we have the third non-benign gender right now. How are the laws structured? Is the state accepting minorities, or also minorities of like gender or sex, or like for example non-binary people, trans people, like are they being seen and then legitimized? And if they're not, or even if the state goes against them, that is like for patriots or nationalists, people who believe in the state or set the state as like their ideal and norm-forming character, right? Yeah, it has a big impact. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have a really quick break, and then we're going to continue.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, welcome back. We have next to me Weinberg, CEO of Cultures Interactive, who is later on also going to tell us more about himself and the project itself. And then we also have Vivian Gerrand from Deakin University, Melbourne, Australia, with us. And Vivian is going to tell us something about the importance of grassroots projects for the prevention work. Vivian, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here with you today, well, tonight for me, actually. I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Just wondering how I can...
We sadly can't change that right now. But we can hear you well. As long as you can hear us and yourself, I think it's fine.
Sure. Well, I wish to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the Boonwurrung lands of the in Naarm, which is in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. In addition to what's already been said today about building resilience to violent extremism and polarisation, I'd like to talk about the role of grassroots projects for the prevention landscape, which is what this BRaVE Fair is designed to do, to promote and celebrate the fantastic work and projects that have been submitted. First of all, I'd like to talk, so the talk will be in three parts, and the first part will be to situate grassroots interventions within a conceptual framework of pro-social resilience. I'll think in particular in terms of the BRaVE 14 measure of youth resilience to violent extremism. The second part of the talk considers the narrative pull factor component of grassroots interventions. What is the role of images in recruitment and resilience to violent extremism? What's the difference between, for example, counter-narrative approaches and what some have termed alternative narratives to those promoted by terrorist groups? What are the qualities of a good alternative narrative? Finally, I'll provide a few examples of such interventions to discuss arts-based grassroots interventions in building pro-social resilience. So when we think about pro-social resilience, it's really important to define what we mean by resilience. And I think Richard pointed out earlier that resilience can be a very problematic term, especially when it's deployed by a government that seeks to put the burden of being resilient onto a particular individual, onto a particular community, rather than actually addressing the reasons why people are struggling to adjust or adapt to conditions of adversity. Recently, I worked for the Centre for Resilient and Inclusive Societies, and we're putting on a conference on the meaning of everyday resilience. What does it mean in an everyday sense? And we're doing that next month. So I've promoted this event on LinkedIn, and one of the contacts in my network wrote in response to the question that was posed to get people interested in the conference, I know what resilience is. Resilience is toughness. And, you know, if you're not resilient, you get bullied and etc. And I thought that was interesting because it really does encapsulate a common understanding of what resilience is. And it's also really important as an example of what we're not doing in the BRaVE project when we think about resilience, because the way that we've defined resilience is in terms of a socio-ecological framework. What that means is resilience is very much a product of resources, systems and structures. It works at an intersectional level. It works at meso, macro, micro scales, and it's never any one thing that can lead to someone being resilient or being vulnerable. So we've heard earlier about the ways in which, for example, somebody radicalizing to terrorism is never just because they happen to be poor or because they happen to be adhering to a particular religion or because they live in a particular part of the world. It's never one thing. It's always a combination. It's always an intersection. It's a combination of the pull factors, the push factors. And even then you might have all of that and still someone doesn't become a terrorist, because very few people actually do go down the road. They might radicalize and become extremists. And as Richard said earlier, there's a difference between extremism and violent extremism, and it's really critical to make that distinction. But when we're thinking also in terms of polarization, extremism and polarization can set the scene for violent action and can make people more predisposed to action orientation. So it is an important thing to think about. So what's the difference between resilience, for example, and pro-social resilience? And we know that resilience is very much bound by context, and it can be enhanced or diminished, as I said earlier, by resources. The sense of relative deprivation, for example, might be a factor in someone's radicalization journey, but not in another's. The difference between resilience and pro-social resilience is that pro-social resilience is resilience that is in the interests of the public good. So you could think about someone deciding to join or go down the road of radicalizing to extremism. That might actually be, in the context that they're in, a resilient response. Because, for example, when so-called Islamic State was very active, it did actually offer people things like a job. It offered them dignity, purpose that was missing in many people living in the West with Muslim backgrounds. When they were applying for a job, would be rejected based on their surname and things like that. So this organization, Islamic State, said to them, hey, join us. We're going to do something that's really positive for you. We're going to give you a job. We're going to give you dignity that's missing. And so for that, in that context, it was actually quite a resilient thing to do, to join. The problem was that upon joining, the reality wasn't what was promised. So there were a lot of false promises made. And also the group that they were joining was one that was exclusivist, meaning it was a group that was informed by an assumption of inequality and superiority. So if you were a member of that group, then you needed to annihilate people that weren't a member of the group. It wasn't a friendly, inclusive. Once you were in, you were that was it. You cannot. It's all premised on an out group and an in group, and there are examples of groups that are exclusivist and don't necessarily support violence, but in that case, that's an example of an exclusivist form of resilience that was developing. So the pro-social resilience is really resilience that's in the interest of the public good, that's in the interest of democracy, and and governments too, as was also pointed out earlier by Richard, they can act in ways that do not promote pro-social resilience, especially when they're operating in a non-democratic fashion, for example. I want to draw now on a measure for youth resilience to violent extremism that also thinks about resilience in a pro-social fashion. So the measure that was pioneered in a study to which I contributed and that was led by Michelle Grossman and Michael Unger identifies 5 key factors that help young people to be resilient. So when those things are working together, that can lead to resilience. And some of them have already been mentioned, for example, cultural identity and connectedness, or bonding capital, bridging capital, so trust and confidence in people from other groups, support from for people in other groups, linking capital, so trust in government and authority figures, and then attitudes towards violence, so the willingness to speak out against violence, non-violent attitudes in general. So when those things are combined, so when you have social capital and you have non-violent attitudes, then this study piloted a measure that says you're more likely to be resilient to violent extremism. So thinking in those terms, we can look at the grassroots interventions, for example, and think about the ways in which they themselves promote different kinds of social capital and the ways in which they themselves promote non-violent attitudes. And this is where we think differently to the counter-narrative space, where there might be a government promoting a narrative against a particular terrorist organization. Those narratives tend to be at best ineffectual and at worst damaging, because they reinforce the perception of a particular kind of suspect community rather than actually addressing the root causes. So what distinguishes the alternative narrative from the counter narrative is the alternative narrative actually does work with root causes and seeks to address them. It works with real and perceived grievances and so psychosocial needs that might lead people to engage with extremist discourse. So then the role of images becomes really important, especially when we're thinking about, well, where are people getting involved, but where are the entry points for engagement with extremist materials? And obviously the online space is full of potential entry points, but on its own, it's not going to necessarily lead someone to radicalize. Still, images online and engagement with particular kinds of image making and multimodal, not even just images now, we think about new apps like Clubhouse, where it's all at the level of speaking. People enter a room and talk, they don't write or see anything. So in multimodal ways, people are finding points of engagement, and those points of engagement can either strengthen resilience or they can lead people to be more vulnerable, depending on the constellation of different factors. And so what the alternative narratives can do is actually provide something that does address those root cause grievances, both at the level of narrative, but also beyond narrative, especially when we're talking about a grassroots intervention that is actually responding to the nuances of the context in which it's operating. Because what might be fantastic as a narrative in one context may really fall flat or do damage in another. So that's why it's so important when we think about the wonderful projects that are being presented today here and that were presented last year at the fair. They are really working both at the level of narrative and at the level of network to engage people in a way that is sustainable, that it actually responds to what they're feeling on the ground, not imposing something top down that's completely unrelatable and in fact alienating for people and probably leads to reduced trust. So alternative narrative grassroots interventions are not attempts at all to de-radicalize people. In fact, one of the things that's really interesting about them is they might actually lead people to radicalize, but just not to violence. So the point of the alternative narrative is to respond to people and give them a sense of purpose and meaning, something that they can join and be proud of, a direction rather than an sort of annihilation. So I think the way they're different from counter narratives, which are trying to sort of get rid of something, they're actually saying, no, we've got something to offer you. You've got something to offer. We want to tap into that. We want to help you. So they're an incredibly powerful tool. And I think there's really not enough that we know yet about how they can work in terms of the efficacy. I'm not sure how much. I mean, I'm doing a study at the moment with some people about the kind of efficacy of different alternative narratives, and there's not a huge amount of evidence yet. There's a small amount of evidence to suggest that they are incredibly effective, but we don't have enough data yet. But based on this understanding of youth resilience to violent extremism, what we can say is that the kinds of interventions being presented in this BRaVE fair are definitely working at the level of social capital and non-violent attitudes. And in that sense, they are building resilience to violent extremism and polarization through these grassroots interventions. I'm thinking about a number of them, but particularly Jamal Al-Khatib, and we've got Jamal Al-Khatib representatives here today, the way that local communities and civil society organizations can develop effective alternative narratives. So the Turn Association, responsible for making this grassroots intervention, was a network of youth workers, filmmakers, Islamic studies scholars, former extremists, young Muslims and non-Muslims, and the program framed its narrative around the story of someone who had actually got involved in a trajectory of radicalization to violence and had been in prison and then had left that jihadi subculture and wanted to help other people through telling his story. So the program already was coming from the point of view of young people. It was tapping into their grievances. It was designed in collaboration with the people who are directly affected or who might have been at risk of encountering content online. And so it was really empathizing with the perspective and the position of these young people. Through social media, using the services of a professional filmmaker, the project succeeded in more than matching the kind of sophisticated levels of production that we would see coming out of, for example, Islamic State materials. And it was so successful that it actually became, I think it was shadow banned. I was reading about the project, or it was banned for a while because it was seen to be, content moderators mistook it for the propaganda of a violent extremist organization. But what the Turn group did differently was it actually encouraged its viewers to move right away from the idea of the enemy that must be annihilated. It encouraged its viewers to move away from the black and white perspective of us versus them and brought them into a territory of ambiguity where suddenly things weren't so clear and things were more up in the air. The grievances were being addressed. The concerns about Islamophobia and the rise of the far right were very much present. But rather than saying, hey, the answer is these people are all against us, let's go against them, the answer was, how can we work together to address these really complex issues and move beyond them? And the project, addressed both ends of the radicalization spectrum through the use of social capital, bonding capital, so meeting young people where they were at in like-minded fashion, bridging capital, putting them in contact with different points of view, linking capital. When young people engaged with the videos and wrote comments in the section, they were encouraged to ask questions. They were then put in touch with what were known as street workers, so like social workers in the online space, and that then led to offline, further consultations if they wished to pursue them. So there was a real potential in this project to rehabilitate people and also to redirect people that might have been getting curious and might have been targeted by extremist organisations online. And I don't want to say too much about the project because I'm aware that the project is actually going to be presented after this session, and they'll have a chance to speak themselves about the wonderful work they're doing. But this is a really powerful example of the ways in which we can actually mobilise things like the BRaVE 14 measure when we think about social capital and non-violence, and we bring those together, and we do it at the level of both aesthetics and politics. Young people are not they're not stupid. They're very perceptive, and they can smell a rat. If the government starts telling them what to do, even if they try and do it in sort of using the kind of language, it's not going to work. It really has to come from the grassroots in order to be effective. And the other thing that distinguished Jamal al-Khatib from, for example, a counter-narrative campaign was that it was not marketed in any way as a preventative project. It was really an alternative method of engagement. And the project's organisers were very upfront as soon as questions were asked about what they were doing. So there was a cultivation of linking capital or trust through that transparency and openness. And the kind of, again, that ontological certainty, so the idea that things are black and white, that's often promised in propaganda from whatever terrorist group, was actually really dismantled as well, because the kinds of materials that were promoted through these videos encouraged a kind of self-reflection and critical review of beliefs and ideas. So this combination, again, of ambiguity, agonism, taking you into the space of good conflict, made this grassroots intervention a very nuanced and, as I said earlier, powerful example of how multimedia resources and grassroots interventions can create a kind of pro-social resilience to violence and polarization. The other, one of the other interventions that happened in this online space was Lulu, which won the BRaVE Innovation Award. And because online gaming cultures have increasingly been a site of facilitation of recruitment into violent extremism and hate, these sort of targeted gamification interventions become really important as well. So Lulu is one of these interventions, and designed by Online Theatre. This online game was designed to educate young people about recruitment pathways into far-right extremism. So it was set in a fictional city in Germany. A far-right terrorist attack had just occurred. The players need to engage with the influencers. They need to see the ways in which the influencer constructs a network, and they're allowed to join her Telegram group. So they move from clear or open access social media to a darker or more encrypted platform in order to understand the manipulations of this influencer called Lulu. So the manipulation mechanisms of the far right within their networks, then they become transparent and identifiable in a way that leads to a different kind of critical apprehension of what young people are seeing online. And I would say that this project is informed by state-of-the-art understandings of mobilisation to hate and violent extremism, and that its interactive format enables a situation that's true to life, that's really relatable for young people. So again, it's that thing of connecting with young people where they're at, that bonding capital, putting them in touch with different perspectives, bridging capital, then facilitating trust through guiding them to understand the ways in which these platforms operate. So these are just two of the amazing interventions that have been submitted for the BRaVE project. And I'm going to stop here because I'm aware that I'm probably going on a bit much and we need to get on to other things. But I want to congratulate all of the projects submitted, and I want to celebrate the fact that we have these kinds of grassroots interventions that can support the development of resilience in young people when they promote this kind of bridging, this kind of social capital and non-violent attitudes. But I also want to go back to the fact that obviously on their own, they're not going to be sufficient, and they have to be combined with a range of other methods that include addressing some of the factors we've heard earlier of socioeconomic, intercultural, but they are an incredibly important part of addressing violent extremism and radicalisation to terrorism, and building resilience to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your input. I think all the compliments you have for the projects definitely arrived. I think people are really happy to hear how much you appreciate and like how excited you are about them. So I have just one term question. How do you define social capital? Because you use it so often. Social capital.
I'm thinking in terms of Putnam's understandings of social capital, so things that enable you to function in a social setting, to connect with other people. Is that clear enough, or do you want me to go to elaborate?
So just for clarification, because I need to understand what we're talking about. So you would say the problems that come from society and like this capital, like society itself has within and like towards individuals.
So the ability to relate to other people, for example, the ability to communicate with others, to get along with others on different levels.
And then also the way you described it, it sounded like empowerment. Like it sounded like while you were explaining what you were saying, it sounded like your way of seeing social like resilience is also like a part like of empowerment. Yeah, is that right?
Absolutely, yes, very much so.
All right, nice. Do you also have questions or input for Vivian?
Well, I'm sucking up all this and getting ready to, and not wanting you to overburden, but getting ready to elaborate on that. I mean, social capital and all that stuff from Bourdieu is, I think, is very important to our work, and that already gives me a chance to leap to introducing myself as very briefly as someone who's working with an NGO who puts that to the ground. So grassroots, I think that's what I'm sitting in here for. And in terms of social capital, I think somebody has to build it, somebody has to do it. And that, of course, brings up the question: how do you do that? How do you do that most effectively?
So you're asking me the question.
Oh no, that wasn't a question actually. Just a side comment in support of your conceptual background, if I may.
You were also saying that there can be damage done, like not wanting to radicalize yourself, like wanting to empower, but not like pulling people to one side or telling them like not building a world of black and white, but finding like a gray area, finding social workers who have been radicalized, finding people who understand each other, and then putting them together to work together. That seems like a really hard. It seems like really complicated to start. What do you think? How do you start with the base work?
Well, there are many different ways in which this is already happening. It's actually not something you necessarily need to even start. It's usually something you need to build on, because you just need to see, when you think in terms of resilience, most people they have incredible resilience. How can we build on that? That's the question. So it's really a strengths-based approach. It's not necessarily starting from scratch. It's about what's working here. How can we do that more? What's not working here? Let's do less of that. So it's not about setting out to completely overturn something. It might be eventually, but really it's about looking at what's already happening and extending the things that are actually working. So we know that young people, for example, use online spaces in incredibly pro-social ways. That's one of the primary ways, especially in the pandemic, in which they engage with others. And they're not usually doing it with any intention at all of any kind of violence. They're doing it because that's their social life.
We're getting back to Harald Weinberg from, like I said earlier, the CEO of the Cultures Interactive. He's also going to tell us a bit. Maybe also have some questions for Vivian.
Yes, of course. Indeed. Now, as I already said, we are quite happy to actually host, as one of the partners of the BRaVE project, to host this event here. Hello to the people here in the audience and very much also in the internet. As I said before, and in listening to Vivian, I thought, how do we actually bring this to the ground as an NGO, Cultures Interactive, who is engaging in and actually practicing with not only young people but mostly young people, and in so doing, trying to build what BRaVE calls resilience, and actually many people call resilience, or build social capitals, or build some commonly shared capacity to be as peaceful and as productive as we can. Now, historically speaking, we've been around for, I think, more than 15 years. Cultures Interactive as one partner, framework partner of the National Prevent program. And having said the word prevent again, makes me think of how much I actually like the word resilience, and just like the language in which we support something, build something, or for something, and not necessarily always sort of counter or are against something. And that's another reason why I'm much in favor also of the discourse that both you and others that comes from Vivienne in Australia right now. We've been around, just to say the least, that's maybe interesting or necessary, for about 15, 20 years in Germany, mostly what we call the new states, the eastern federal states of the Federal Republic, in which since reunification, as I'm sure you're all aware of, there's been quite some issues in racism and violence and right-wing extremism. Not so much about so-called Islamism, that sort of the most of the discourse on prevention is emphasizing on, and that has been actually quite grave since about only 2 years ago, when then there was a moment also international when we realized, oh, oops, we have another big problem, which is right-wing extremism, white supremacy and all that. And I think that is this is one of our major issues, has been for the last 15 and 20 years in Germany, mostly in East Germany, but in Germany generally, and also in Europe and in Eastern Germany in particular. That much a very brief run-up of Cultures Interactive, and just perceive us as, many people also call us the practitioners, because we then go down to the so-called grassroots level. I remember when I first saw the proposal for this project, the Horizon 2020, and that was actually one of our first summer schools, and Cultures Interactive's first summer school was very funny because it was in the midst of forests, woods, lakes, and there was actually grass. So we actually not only are we grassroots level, we were literally sitting on the grass. And I read this proposal, and it was very clear. And this proposal, while it comes from academicians, if I might say so, I'm one of them myself. Actually, it very much has this emphasis on cultural work, on youth cultural, and also sports and the arts as well. And this is why we wanted it. And I was happy to, and then when the consortium was actually able to get this project, and we were able to get to work and practice youth cultural approaches.
What do you think, what is part of so many countries in European become just more nationalist, more patriotic, more right-wing, more extreme, more also violent extreme? Because it's not, like you said, it's Germany, but it's going all over around, sometimes even in places where the population of people with minorities is really big.
Yeah.
But sometimes I don't really understand how there are so many minorities, but still there's so much racism. Like Portugal, for example, also really
as was said before, I think, was it Michael or Richard, and you find most of racism often in areas where you don't have any perceived or not very many perceived foreigners. Why is that? There is a myriad of literature on the root causes of so-called radicalization. I think one of the things that I like, the second most liked issue about the BRaVE project really is that it focuses on phenomena or facts of inequality. Just look how resources worldwide are dealt with, and how increasing inequality is the major element, the major trait of this development. I think that, for me personally, is the most important root factor. Other than that, I don't actually. There are very many psychological and socio-psychological and all sorts of things come in. Pull and push factors. It might be an area of academic thought that's already a bit over theorized, if that is a correct word. And I always feel quite well on the area of actually doing something with it, in order to alleviate the negative consequences. But I think inequality worldwide is certainly, real inequality, cultural inequality, economic inequality, felt discrimination, all these factors that polarize societies, across the globe. And we need to, build whatever it is, the resilience, social capital, in order to get along better with all that.
It seems to be also like a part of populism, just criticizing the state and then finding someone to blame. It seems always like the inequality making people trying to find someone to blame, and then often it's minorities. Because they're already weak. Thank you so much for giving us all your input, and thank you for being here. Thanks for the exchange. Next, we are going to start with the BRaVE Award winners. Really excited. Thank you, Vivian, so much. So, we have Ulrich Neuberg from Thun, based in Vienna, Austria. He's here today to present their project Jamal Al-Khatib. I hope I said it. Almost. I've been practicing this a lot. One of the 3 jury award-winning projects. Your project is one of the projects that won a €10,000 subcontract from Cultures Interactive to support your work. Before we go there, we also have Max Rademacher from Breathe In, Break Out, from Halle, Germany, who has joined us here today. We're going to start with you, Ulrich.
Yes.
Can you shortly explain what your project is about and what did you realize with your money? I mean, it's been highly complimented already by Vivian, so we have high expectations. No,
yeah, I'm very happy about that, and I want to thank Vivian for so eloquently putting our project in a very broad context. Thanks for having us. Best regards from Vienna, from the whole team, and the youngsters and young adults that work with us. We are a very diverse team back in Vienna. People working in different professions that have come together back in 2016-17 when the whole project was incepted. And as Vivian already said, we mostly deal with the topic of alternative narratives in violence and extremism prevention. Our most visible outputs are the videos, obviously, and our social media campaigns. But the scope of the project is much bigger. It begins, and most importantly, begins in narrative biography work with young adults and youngsters that express their grievances, tell their stories, and that's basically at the core of the project. Those are young people that deal with topics such as flight, marginalization, religion is a huge topic, of course, structural racism that they encounter. Yeah, it started out as a very regional project in Vienna and has become bigger. We've been lucky enough to get grants from the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung in Germany, and that allowed us to continue the project and allowed us to do another series of videos and also social media campaigns with topics such as Srebrenica, one was on Chechnya, another one was just on Ramadan as a topic. And I am a filmmaker, and I say that because me personally, as part of the project, I don't think I can grasp every aspect of the project because the team is so diverse. We have people from Islamic studies working on it. We have people from political sciences, research, psychologists, and very important, and in the inception, most importantly, social workers, because those were the ones that encountered the topics of jihadi subculture back in 2016 in their institutions, and got in contact with the young people. And our first kind of like initial idea was to do something for secondary prevention, so to reach those audiences that would not be present in institutions of social work in Vienna, because they might already be partially radicalized or have come in contact with that. And there was a young guy who's in prison who worked with one of my colleagues, and he always said he wanted to write a book on his experiences, and that was the inception. And then we started to work with other youngsters. We saw all these similarities and topics and these very concrete experiences of a marginalized life. And then we had to do something with that and together with the youngsters, because we all wanted to participate in this process of creating alternatives. And most importantly, because I'm sitting here, the BRaVE Awards grant has, the videos basically are in German, because they are regional, they're very specific and targeted, and have very specific autobiographic stories. But with the money from the BRaVE Awards, we have now started to do a translation for English for the videos, also for educational materials that accompany the videos, so they can be used in workshops. And I just got from Vienna one of the videos that has been synchronized into English, and maybe we can have a short look. But before we do, I want to say it's one of an excerpt, some scenes from one of the videos that deals, for example, with democracy and shirk, which is Jamal, our protagonist, faces a day in court, and his peers tell him that he cannot accept the authority of a court. So this video deals with the topic of shirk and democracy as such, and I think we have 1 minute short excerpts from the movie, and you can hear the English voice of Jamal now.
Okay, great. So everybody can watch it.
Yes.
Not just us here. Nice.
Let's watch it.
Some of the brothers were in the courtroom and encouraged me. We had eye contact the whole time. The judge said I was in contempt of court. He asked my lawyer, "Why doesn't he stand up?" I said, "I can't. Doesn't he have anything to say? Does he know what that means?" But I no longer knew what I was doing right or what I was doing wrong. I just wanted to get out, no matter what. When I left the courtroom, my brothers were awaiting me. Some of them patted me on the back. "Jamal is strong. He's the toughest," they said. "He won't let the Daoud oppress him." Everybody was saying that I did the right thing, but I couldn't account for it. That's why you always have to make your own decisions. Just like I do when I'm with my friends and we're planning to do something. It's not the one who has the most money who decides what we are going to do. If we, as a group of friends, can do it, why shouldn't it work for society? And if it's the way the Sahaba choose, why should we resist?
Okay, great.
Okay, so these videos in English are going to be launched as soon as we're done with all the synchronization. I hope you watch it. Jamal Al-Khadib is an ongoing project, so go subscribe, watch it on Instagram, and we hope that with the English versions in good audio, we will reach other audiences as well and make it more accessible also for academic audiences that want to analyze or work on it or use it in workshops.
Can I ask you a few questions about
Yes,
the production?
certainly.
So everybody was wearing masks. That was for like anonymity?
Yeah, of course, some of the youngsters and young adults that we worked with obviously had to be anonymized because they had come into contact with the radicalized scenes, and it was not. So in the inception, we knew that we had to do that, and that's why, together with the young adults, we created this protagonist, Jamal Al-Khadib, and we specifically, this is what I'm all about in terms of what my interest is, dramatization of storytelling, because it allows, after the narrative biography work, making a movie goes back to the storytelling and in very, very small details allows for the young people to reflect on their own lives, because you have to make decisions. Where do we shoot it? What does the protagonist look like? Who are the people he deals with? How do they talk? How does it sound? All of this, yes, it's all participative work.
Also the filming itself?
And the filming itself.
And the script writing?
Exactly.
Amazing.
And the approach is make the threshold very small, so that's why professionals work on it, like myself as a filmmaker, make the threshold for the youngsters very small, but have them participate in the whole process, so it's their project. And that goes to the online street work also afterwards, where they can vocalize their needs, their feelings, always complicated, always conflicting, as life is, never easy, but a little bit hopeful as well. And that's why we hope, as Vivian put it, it's an alternative narrative.
Yeah,
it's not a counter narrative, it's something that comes from the young adults and is being taken as it is and projected out into the world.
Amazing. I mean, it's also like an area of, like in a creative area of work, they're getting an insight to what's also not always the case.
Vocational
right?
training.
Yeah.
No, it's not meant as a vocational training, but
yeah, the producing of like a movie and thinking about the script, set design.
Yeah, I think it's
cool.
exciting. It's very inclusive, and it's with professionals working on it. It's very approachable for young people, and it's their medium, and it's their voice, and that's good for them, I think. Also.
And which social media channels are you using?
So it's we started on YouTube and Facebook back in 2016. It was still slightly a deal. Yeah. It has gone to Instagram mostly now, and that's where we have the social media campaigns and where we distribute the videos. Of course, the main videos are very long. They don't work on Instagram, so we put them on YouTube and then link them. And that's why we've also switched more to social media campaigns that have a shorter format.
TikTok.
Yeah, no TikTok yet.
No TikTok yet, all right. Yeah, thank you so much for the input. Super exciting. I'm excited to see this already.
Please do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in a really creative way of giving people a voice. Thanks. Now we're getting to Max Rademacher from Breathe and Break Out. So you're from Halle and you're here. Tell us a bit more about your activities in Halle and your project.
Yeah, so for us, BRaVE, participating in the BRaVE project was really the opportunity to strengthen our role. We already have been playing and to implement what we call the Hip Hop Resilience Project, because we work with the hip hop community with youth. And so this year, könnten wir den ersten Slide schon mal zeigen? Danke. We felt really the urgent need to close the wounds that the neo-Nazi attack of 2019 inflicted on our communities. And this is why, together with the street art collective, Freiraumgalerie, and a range of organizations working in the field of migrant support, social housing, popular education, community work, we painted a big mural in the city center reading Halle stays indivisible, Halle bleibt unteilbar, which was for us a way to underline our commitment to democracy and to show our internal solidarity in the face of possible future neo-Nazi attacks. And so the photos you see, we can go to the next photo, show the vernissage of 25th of June, bringing together the local community. In front of the building you see is the Welcome Treff, which is a migrant support center where migrants and refugees can come to seek any sort of support, and to underline and to celebrate that message with female rap, Arabic live music, and of course breaking, all of which has been live streamed by the German TV. Breaking is breakdance.
Okay, just
we try to push the terms that the youth use themselves.
Okay.
To have a better connection, and yeah, so breakdance is really a mainstream word. So and das nächste Foto. So if you look closely there at the breaker, his name is Felix. It reads, make Halle break again. This is no surprise, because what we witnessed this year and already last year is that the pandemic hit really hard on the local breaking community. And as you know, breaking emerged as a collective response against the structural discrimination and oppression in the New York suburban communities in the 70s. And it was really, it's a spirit of resilience that this is the kind of breaking we wanted to push in Halle. So to reinvigorate the breaking community, we organized within the BRaVE project a series of pro-level workshops in May and June to build motivation, connection, and so forth. And then we took the idea of using breaking itself as a space of resilience building even further by organizing an international resilience battle on the next day, on 26th of June, which was exactly 3 weeks after the AfD, the right-wing extremist party in Sachsen-Anhalt, state elections got 20%. And we say, no, we don't want this. And what it looks like, you can see it in the video. Just one day earlier, the municipality to not authorizing it because of the COVID situations and the infection rates. But we managed to bring together 249 people, 112 dancers from all over Germany, which is actually for us a record number. And there was really this need of the community to come together, express themselves, and so and what we did else was is actually we distributed these. I don't know if you have been vaccinated already against conspiracy theories.
No, I haven't. Thank you so
now
much.
is the occasion, and because we thought the German Federal Ministry of Health, Jens Spahn, he didn't really manage to protect the population and improve their political health. So we thought, we have to do something against conspiracy theories, and it goes actually back to BRaVE again, because last year Henry Tuck in the BRaVE conference, he said, well, what we witnessed clearly during the pandemic is an upsurge of conspiracy theory beliefs, especially amongst youth, but also the general population on the net. So, Mr. Tuck, we have heard you. So we run this campaign to really explain in a very simple and clear manner to our community how you can recognize, what you need to check for to identify any political information and stories to conspiracy theories, and this vaccination certificate is really a tool for that. We have been distributing it since at hip-hop events, cultural events, political demonstrations, and youth centers. It really works well, because every time you give it to somebody, even if the person is not from, let's say a political spectrum, generally it works. They are very, it's really a good tool. And connected to this, we produced online videos. Can we see the next slide, please? And we produced short online videos to explain, you know, conspiracy theories about Corona, climate change, and so forth, and to reach into the online community where conspiracy theories beliefs have been especially strong. So we can watch a short glimpse of these videos.
Ja, Klima ist ein Paradebeispiel für Verschwörungsideologie. Was Verschwörungsideologien im Grunde ausmachen, haben wir übrigens schon in diesem Video hier erklärt. Das Klimathema ist hart, belastend und wird halt auch nicht einfach von alleine besser. Die Psychotherapists und Psychologists for Future nennen das Ganze Klimaangst und bieten übrigens auch Support und Beratung an, um damit besser umgehen zu können.
Yeah, this is what we did. With the BRaVE money, and well, the flame is still on. We continue. We keep up the momentum. This Friday is a big climate strike all over Germany, organized by Fridays for Future. So we will be there and yeah, support political activism and all those who want to change society for better with fresh breaking moves.
I don't know if you can see it in my face. I'm extremely amazed by all of these projects and like, how can I be part of this? Amazing work. Super, yeah, so many interactive ways of trying to get to youth people, also connecting within Germany, getting other people from all over. Amazing. Are you thinking about like furthering your dance areas?
Furthering my, sorry?
The dance areas? Like from the break?
To organize.
Did I say it wrong? Did I say it wrong?
To bring in to connect with other dances or
yeah,
this is what we
street style.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we already are doing, and this is why, you know, for example, at the resilience battle we organized the drummer versus breaker session where we had Munu percussion from Burkina Faso, who are originally from Burkina Faso and staying in Halle, having performing percussion and having breaking over it, and which really is a way to do that, what you call bridging, actually, because of course breaking is has West African cultural roots, but now it's a modern form of dance, and so bringing it back to that original percussion style was of course a way to you know, to create something different.
Yeah.
And it was really an experiment, actually. We didn't know will it work, and when the host of the battle announced, so everybody saw like the Burkina Faso crew getting on stage, right, and then the host was announcing it, so now we're gonna do a breaking versus drummer session. Who's up for it? And everybody was rushing the stage, and we had like 30 dancers on stage, and it was like, and we thought it would like last 10 minutes, and then it's cool, okay, yeah. It's a little parenthesis, and no, they continued for 20 minutes actually, yeah. And we had to say, okay guys, now we have to stop, because, and even afterwards they continued to clap, and it was really great, and yeah, and definitely, it's always, we consider ourselves as part of a bigger subcultural movement that includes reggae culture, all the other urban dances like trumping, popping, locking, and yeah, definitely, it's always connectable. And this Friday, there will be as well, yeah, trumpers.
Mm-hmm. Exciting. Did you have any, like, were there any anti-people? Was there? Because, I mean, you are in the center of so much right-wing activism. I can imagine that so many multicultural people and so much, like, yeah, being in this political spectrum, like, you have so many people, but still, like...
Surprisingly, only on the net.
Okay.
So there has been quite massive response to the vaccination campaign videos on the net with a bunch of conspiracy theory sympathizers who have been commenting the videos, and it was quite of a surprise. It was not really a problem because we said anyway, it will contribute to the debate, and we have seen immediately progressive, democratically minded people stepping up to the plate, answering the commentaries, and so it created a kind of public debate in the net, and we believe it was good, but I suppose it is very well. People from CivicNet, Berlin organization, they called us and they asked if we need support, if we felt aggressed, because it's true that the response of these people have been somehow disrespectful, and so they offered their support to say, okay, how can you react and everything, and it was an interesting experience, and yeah, we will see. I mean, we will be continuing to distribute the vaccination passes, and we will see.
Yeah, great. Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, the online experience is actually something that we in the project try to cultivate in certain means, because the discussions that are generated online are a very good reflection of how diverse these topics that we talk about are seen, and we have had our experiences of shitstorms, but that only shows that you engage people on a secondary level, because otherwise, if they wouldn't even watch it, you'd know you'd miss them, right?
Yes.
And then the discussions that evolve under the videos actually are very important, can be a very important base for knowledge for people who read it, because they get those sometimes very simple black and white arguments by people who criticize videos or actions or whatever, and then afterwards, if you go into online street work, you can actually cultivate discussions there that also give arguments for alternative viewpoints. So that's actually similar experience, but a very, very important experience.
And I mean, we are in the middle of analysis and drawing conclusions and talking about the limits of the project. And I would like just to make another comment on our experience, and this goes back as well. I mean, it echoes one of the points that have been made last year in October by the BRaVE researchers is really that problem that to do effective political awareness raising amongst youth, of course progressive, democratic, open-mindedness, to promote these values, you need to have structures, engaged, committed youth workers, social workers, and communication amongst youth. And often, I mean, we take a more explicit political stance, Breathe and Break Out, and sometimes youth are frightened, right? It's, no, you are the political guys, no, we just want to do hip-hop. And we see that when there's good communication, when there's, you know, good vibrations, good human connections, and then it really works. You can
keep the dialogue open.
Yeah, the dialogue, and you can transmit the political content to the youth.
Yeah.
If it's not there, you don't manage it, and this is why I want to go back to it. Like what often, I mean, it is time intensive. It is so time intensive to communicate, to build a personal relationship with youth, and the funders, they don't pay you. And this is exactly what one of the BRaVE researchers said last year. I don't know who it was, that the funders don't understand the fundamental and crucial role of building personal relationship with youth. And this is what the social workers do, and in Halle as well, all over East Germany, social spending, youth-centered spending is systematically cut down every year. Every year in Halle, the youth workers, they fear of losing their jobs. They don't know if funding will be prolonged. So the funding system and structures are I mean, this is a really political problem.
Like they're super important. That's why it's so good that we have BRaVE. And for that, I would like to give you your prizes.
Thanks.
Because you're doing so much great work, that is so exciting that I'm all going to Google afterwards again. Let's not do this wrong. There you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us all your input and sharing your experiences. And thanks for doing your work. Keep on doing it. It's really important. I'm going to please ask you to come later.
Bye-bye.
We'll see each other again. Thank you so much. Now we're going to have Lucia Oppermann and Noah Zippel. Come to the stage, please. Hello. Hi. So, next to me, Lucia, did I say it right?
Yes,
Lucia. One of the innovators from Lulu. The project has received the Innovation Award for their online game named Lulu from onlinetheater.live. So, why is your game so innovative? What is happening? It's been complimented all over the place. People are really excited.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Please tell us more.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me or us and for the award as well. What is so innovative about it? I don't know, it's a project between two theaters actually. It's the online theater and the How Hebben Ufer. And you can't, yes, of course, and you can't really say what kind of thing it is. It's not like a theater, but it's some kind of theater. It's also an app. It's also a game. And I think that's why it's called innovative.
It's an app.
Yes, actually, well, it's called interactive fiction game. So it's a game. It's a game you can download in an app store or in the Google Play Store. And then we created fictive social media platforms based on Instagram, TikTok, Telegram, and also Reddit, and but they are only created for the game, so they are not real social media platforms.
You just have them in the game.
Just have them in the game, and then during the game you're like playing on all these platforms, and it's about getting to know the manipulation strategies of the new rights, and they are very tricky because the new rights are really subtle, so you can't really say, okay, this person is right-wing and on social media. So they are kind of mainstream. They are posting a lot of like vacation pics or food or stuff like that, but they are also normalizing right-wing ideas with it, and we wanted to recreate this experience of liking or seeing stuff and not really knowing if it's just mainstream stuff or if it's political stuff, but then to recreate this feeling of getting drawn into a bubble of a right-wing organization. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting.
Yes.
So you're not showing them like the stereotypical right-wing agendas where it's already clear that it's right-wing,
Yes, exactly.
but like the gray zone of
Yeah.
the things you might not know. I mean, for example, it can also have to do with clothes. There's a lot of like, I heard there's a lot of like fashion also
fashion.
about it, like numbers you don't know.
Yeah,
like
fashion, literature, all this stuff.
symbols and everything.
Exactly, but yeah, and it's mostly about how different platforms are used differently. Like the main platforms like YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and stuff like that, they're already regulations, so you can't be that open with your ideas. But the thing about like this follower and influencer thing is that you can get really close to your followers as an influencer. So
As an ideal, maybe also.
yes, as an idol, you have a lot of power and influence, and also a lot of emotional influence. I think that's why it works so well to catch people on social media. And we all know this feeling of being on TikTok like for hours and hours, or on Instagram, or I don't know. And we really wanted to recreate this feeling, but also to like show the strategies behind a lot of these platforms and also about the persons who use it for their reasons.
So how does it work? So I'm on your app and I'm using, for example, the Reddit version or the Insta version, and then do I like get points when I find out when I'm being manipulated?
Yeah, kind of. So it's called interactive fiction game because it's in fiction, but you can interact with it. But it's not like you're all free to go. There's more like a path you follow, and first you are on the app, and then you get like a message of your best friend, who's an influencer called Frida, and she tells you that she got a huge shitstorm for one of her videos on Via, that's our Instagram platform, and that she's really upset about it, and she also, it's a video message, so she's crying and telling a lot of stuff. And the video was some kind of feminist video. And then she asks you to delete all these comments, and while deleting these comments on her Via profile, you get a message of another person who's telling you, yeah, I think this shitstorm didn't just happen, but I think it's calculated, and I think there's more behind it. And I think there's some sort of organization. And then this person asks you if you want to find out who's behind this shitstorm.
So you're becoming like a social media
detective
of resilience. I love it.
Yeah, something like that. And then you have to create an account yourself, and then you are like on this fake social media. We had like, I think 15 actors and actresses.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. And then you have to like yourself into the right bubble, and there's a score where you can see how right the platform thinks you are already. Yes, and then you have this feeling of you can see there you're swiping through it.
Super exciting. And do you have to focus on right extremism or also a different kind of extremism?
No, it was mainly right extremism with the extra focus on anti-feminism. Yes.
Sounds super interesting. Yeah. I'm already got my phone ready. So for you, what do you think? How much further can you go with what you got from BRaVE? Like with the financial support you get now? What is the utopia of what you started already?
I think
where would you like to go from here?
Yeah, we're thinking about how to make more advertisement for the game, because it's really, we're getting the theater bubble, but not really the huge Germany bubble. So that's something we really want to approach, how to get more people to play it. And also maybe an English version would be great.
Yeah, so it's more open for everybody.
Yes.
So get the app, everybody out there. You heard it. Sounds really interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for your input. I'm already excited, and I'm going to get your feedback after the break. 10 minutes in the bathroom. Next we have Noah. Noah is part of the association Klanggerüst, who have also received the People's Choice Award. So tell us about Klanggerüst. I already like the name.
So Klanggerüst is a cultural...
Can you talk a bit more loud, please?
Yes. Klanggerüst is a cultural association in Erfurt. We are located in a district with huge political and social divide. And we just try to bring together young people, young creatives, give them space to do their stuff, and a stage where they can show their work. Yeah, that's pretty much what we are doing, like theater, poetry slam, music jam sessions. Yeah, we are there for the people in this district and try to get them together and to act.
Okay, nice. Do you also have I don't know, how do you protect the spaces? So how do you protect the spaces from, for example, extremism, or do you have big signs out, or how do you keep the people inside and the space itself?
We are located in a house And
That's the first step.
there's a big garden around it. Yeah.
Are you also like thematisieren?
Talking about?
Yeah. Are you also talking about like extremism or radicalism, or try to maybe also like choose or especially support theaters that are like about certain topics?
Yes, like we are, as I already said, we are a place where people should communicate together and yeah, just feel free about their thoughts and their feelings, but extremism is not welcome.
Do you have like certain projects that are on that are going to come soon for people who are watching who might want to come
now,
by?
Right now we have a dialogue of diversity where old and young people and people with different origins from this district where we are located come together and talk about their wishes, their vision for the district, and we try to organize some festivals and yeah.
Oh, festival, like theater festivals.
More like jam sessions, but theater as well. Yeah, we just trying to make the district more diverse.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Really good. And in which area are you?
It's in the north of Erfurt.
Okay, nice, yeah, because I go to Erfurt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have friends there, so I come visit.
Come visit us.
So, also for the two of you, I got some nice prizes. There you go. Let's just one.
Thank you.
And now I would ask all the winners please to come on stage. Richard! Love having Richard on stage. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for all of your great projects. Thank the technicians and everybody here for all of your work and great efforts. Thank you very much.